One doesn't kill off the protagonist at the beginning of a story? Well, last I checked, there's no rule book for science fiction. You can do whatever you want. That's why it's fiction.
Because then the story is over. Killing the protagonist can be a pivotal plot point or theme, like in Planescape Torment. In fact, this would have been a great tie-in to non-lethal KO death and gameplay. A writer can tell any tale they want, provided it's done properly. If it's purely for dramatic effect, then it's sensationalism, and the story is meaningless, like sugar ornamentation on a cake. When someone dies, their story is over. If resurrection is commonplace, then death becomes marginalized and resurrection a simple plot device so the writer can do whatever the hell they want. Why would anyone care of characters and the value of scenes if death not only has no meaning but can be cheated? It makes all life and death situations flaccid, mindless, devoid of suspense, like any fears toward death, and makes the universe you're in kind of boring and not very interesting, which is what ends up happening to Shepard. This really comes down to you missing the point. There is no meaning or purpose behind killing Shepard. If its point is to give an excuse for gameplay, that is, make Shepard level 1, fix their face, then the developers could have simply just done that. Making it part of the narrative is fine too. I'm all for that, provided it's done right. Resurrection, like any fantastical complex thing, needs at least one literary device for us to suspend our disbelief. But, looking at it, resurrection wasn't even needed. There are many situations that could cause Shepard to join a terrorist group that do not require resurrection. Mass Effect 2 doesn't even know how to handle this situation and screws up the details. A grade schooler could have done better.
But when you're talking about science fiction, you talk with such finality, your argument's just completely invalid.
Genre is irrelevant. It's the story that matters. Proper writing is very important. Schools at various levels teach writer's craft. There are rules and reasons why stories are accomplished in certain ways. If you like mindless, meaningless sensationalism, great. But don't try and defend that something is told well by not providing evidence and say it is. These are not little bumps in the story. These are huge, gaping, obvious holes that anyone with half a brain, with a few sentences and one cutscene, could have fixed. I was under the impression we were playing a Mass Effect game, made by a company who put storytelling on the forefront of their productions, with a team of writers and editors. We are expecting a quality of writing from the narrative because there's a 2 in the title, and they said they planned out a trilogy. For handing a loaded subject like death and resurrection in space, a writer doesn't even have to be at the top of their game. Just ask any kid about planets. If I was writing a sci-fi story with resurrection on my plate, I would do some research, find some interesting science, and weave it into a believable children's tale. But Mass Effect 2 doesn't even try to do this. The guy who wrote the codex for Alkera should have written this scene. Instead, Shepard's death was one giant marketing stunt.
One doesn't kill the protagonist off at the beginning of the story? Well, one just did. So what now? Argument defeated.
After reading and watching hundreds of stories, we all see patterns. 95% of all stories involve death. Some of them deal with the process of dying, its theme, and sometimes resurrection. There are right and wrong ways to do so. Why? Because it's a very sensitive, diverse topic and everyone has opinions of it. Probably because we're big on not dying, and the whole mystery and science of it. Killing off a protagonist of a story in the first 10 minutes, then bringing them back immediately after for no reason, is fundamentally flawed when it has no value aside from paying a team of animators to make a scene. And it looked like it was written by an 8-year-old who thought blowing up a spaceship would be cool. Unless Cyber Jesus is a huge part of the narrative, is a major theme, or something that the storyteller must tell us so quickly, so soon, and in that particular way, like Shepard's body being an anti-collector weapon, or must be upgraded to stop the bad guys, and his death was one giant ruse by Cerberus, well, that would have some meaning, wouldn't it? I don't really care what the meaning is. If there's none, then it's just a device. A writer that would resort to a one-dimensional resurrection plot at the start of a story would have to be very frustrated, completely out of options, and drained creativity, maybe partly dumb because one possibly cannot choose another venue to match up the protagonist with the plot, since for some bizarre reason they're going in other directions. Or maybe someone in charge told them to, and how to write it. Mass Effect 1 ended with loads of space to continue the plot, and they still screwed it up. Resurrection could be done for a major theme or key point of the story being told, for dramatic effect, for symbolism as a means of motivating someone else to take up the mantle of protagonist or hero, like a revolution, which implies we're going to have another protagonist or series of, that a cause or idea is what their deaths represent, and each new hero is a resurrection of the previous. Or as a red herring or sleight of hand, and the protagonist really didn't die. Google when it's okay for the protagonist to die, and you'll find 14 articles by writers and average people. They talk about protagonist death, but none recommend resurrection. But Shepard did die early. That's original. And that's fine, provided the writer knows what the hell they're doing. For example, in Metal Gear Solid 2, Solid Snake comes back as a clone with their memories intact by reattaching the arm from the corpse of his predecessor. And that's after we learn his dead brother from the previous game underwent a similar operation with Ocelot's dismembered arm and mentally controls him at times. As insanely stupid as that sounds, it's more believable than Shepard's resurrection. Man, I can't believe I just for the first time in my life defended Metal Gear Solid 2. Mass Effect 2 has only sensationalism. It's worse than a 90s daytime soap opera where characters return after years of supposed death, since it does take place in a world of science fiction. Instead of properly using devices and science fiction, it pulls what's called a hand wave. Look at games like Shadow of Destiny, the Legacy of Kain series, Medieval, and the best of all, Planescape Torment. Not only is Resurrection done right, it's more than just a plot device.
Boy is trying to make you believe that he is an expert on the subject or an authority figure on science fiction.
Exactly. I'm glad that none of us accept arguments of authority.
Okay, so people being brought back to life through science is completely unbelievable in a science fiction story, yet being able to change the mass of an object through a Mass Effect field is fine.
The Mass Effect, the genre, and the universe the story is in have nothing to do with the resurrection of Shepard. The only way it would is if it was done or referred to before, which there's no evidence of. The only thing that has some remote relationship is the pattern of Tim and Shepard's eyeballs. This blue alien chick has nothing to do with resurrecting Shepard. She may have been involved with getting Shepard's meat and tubes, but still has nothing to do with Cyber Jesus.
Because it's science fiction, all these ideas are fantastic. If you're gonna read a science fiction story, you have to suspend some disbelief.
Yes, exactly. Suspension of disbelief, regardless of genre or setting, is based on how well the content and context of the story is told to allow us to believe in the fiction. There are so many ways this is accomplished. Mass Effect 2 doesn't do it right because it doesn't show or tell us how or why point B follows point A.
Maybe the core of the planet was hollow.
What?
Maybe it was a different density.
What?
Maybe the rotation was different as such that the fall of Shepard was not such that the impact would destroy his body.
Yeah, because it would have burnt up in the atmosphere before the ashes even hit the ground. Dude, it's a planet. Do you know what planets do to small, really fast-moving objects? If the atmosphere somehow doesn't eradicate Shepard through pressure, what do you think the atmosphere of only gaseous ammonia and methane would do to a human body? And then we have gravity. Google toxicity ammonia and see what 5,000 parts per million does to a person.
Maybe he still had Mass Effect shields going.
A planet versus possible kinetic barriers, where Shepard is traveling near Mach 2 into a planet. Well, I guess I can just also invent things up to defend my positions too, right? But that would make me deluded. You have no basis of deduction for these ideas. You are inducing things. Why? If the story is so good and is so well told as you say it is, why can't it stand up on its own?
There's a ton of unknown variables that could have led to his body being recoverable.
Exactly. Unknown variables. Questions were raised within the narrative. Obvious ones that were not answered. This is one of the problems. You speculating isn't an answer. The ones I addressed, none of which you even attempted to refute, and just started making other stuff up. The issues I raise are based on the narrative whose observations I start with and then use science for, like explosive velocity to explain Shepard's speed, and the actual codex data from the planet Alkera, because the questions force us to try and figure it out. The narrative didn't tell or show us what happened.
Well, we don't know how they did it. If we did know how Cerberus brought Shepard back to life, we would be bringing people back to life right now.
Okay, at this point, you are missing the point. I'm just going to move on.
There's no scientific jargon that explains how to make a lightsaber, otherwise we would have lightsabers.
Yes, but there are lightsabers. I don't need a scientific explanation as to how a lightsaber works. It's there. It's in the narrative. It's being used. I can see and hear them and watch them function. They're common. When you see and hear something, it really helps with the believability of it. What I think of their feasibility, science or science fiction, is totally irrelevant because their existence is clear. So where's the Cerberus resurrection machine? Where's the wizard? Or the applied phlebotinum? Or any other kind of literary or plot device I can point to or listen to? Where is the scene explaining Shepard's death, preservation, and rebirth? What they gave us is simply wrong. At best, it's contradictory, and at worst, it's meaningless. If they're not using fictional literary explanations, then they need to use contemporary ones, which is why they have to provide sufficient scientific explanation because they're going that medical miracle route. I don't think this is wise, but this is what they provided. You have to ask such questions, and they can make these answers up. I don't really care. It could be scientifically false. I won't like that, but at least it's something. I'd be forced to accept it and laugh at the poor research the writer did, but it would be there. We constantly need the suspension of disbelief with any content, especially when something new or complex and mysterious is introduced, and especially when the conditions for resurrection don't explain the effects of Shepard's death and preservation. You either do it with a plot device, science, or some alternative feasible explanation. Again, Mass Effect 2, just hand waves. And if you think this makes sense, you simply do not understand what you're talking about. You can like it, you can dislike it, I don't care. To say it's good writing is fundamentally wrong.
You believe that every time someone dies, they should handle it the way they handled it in Babylon 5?
Look at Babylon 5, The Matrix, Star Trek, The Princess Bride, Batman comics, The Mummy, whatever. Even Final Fantasy VI does this better. They all do resurrection for the most part properly. Mass Effect 2 does not even come close. The fact that they not only have an explanation but give the scenes meaning elevates the simple act of rebirth to be more than just a physical plot mechanic. Shepard's rebirth is pointless. There's no soul-searching, symbolism, metaphysical moments, trauma, no holy crap, I'm breathing again, no dreams, no discussion, no conflict whatsoever, even when it had so many opportunities for it to be there. It has no plot value. All you get is a few off-the-cuff jokes here and there, and an animation of Shepard stretching his arm. They screwed these scenes and theme up so badly, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets addressed and subverted by finding out Shepard's a clone, or some bullshit reasons later.
What had happened to originality? I thought we were always arguing that things just copy each other, and now we're arguing that they're not exactly alike?
Originality or not, it still has to be presented right. 4 billion credits, scientists, a space station, and 2 years really doesn't mean anything. All these elements must equal an answer, like the resurrection machine, or the insane genius doctor with the god complex who's cheating death and acts as a wizard, or an army of these guys. Star Trek has the wizard Q, or the Genesis planet. The Princess Bride has the life-sucking machine, the wizard Miracle Max, and the chocolate-coated miracle pill, and a protagonist fueled by true love. The Matrix has Neo, also fueled by love, and the Matrix spiked into his brain. In Babylon 5, you literally have a wizard. For instance, like Shepard, I do not know how Sheridan survived the fall from Zahadum, let alone being so close to his White Star spaceship that supposedly went nuclear. I do not know how his body did not disintegrate or is only slightly injured, or how he wound up in some crevice talking to Lorien. This is unclear. But Lorien is a wizard. He must have done it. You see, that makes sense. We then see him revitalize Sheridan. I don't know how he did that. It must be magic. In Mass Effect 2, Shepard is flying through space with explosive velocity, their suit leaking air, seen struggling and gasping for breath as he nears a planet, appearing to be burning up in its atmosphere. We then get a supplementary comic book that does nothing to explain his death or preservation, because it does not even address the question of how come Shepard didn't simply turn into molecules from atmospheric reentry. It also doesn't explain how Shepard doesn't become pulverized upon hitting the planet, or shattering to so many pieces, or what concentrated ammonia and methane would do to organic material. If there was ever a time to help out the narrative by providing supplementary material to fix something in another narrative, that would have been a great time. There's still no mention of the fate of his brain and brain death, which is the most important part of preserving one's life. The narrative needs to explain or show these things because these are common questions it has raised simply by being told. Obviously, the narrative is not sophisticated enough to someone with half a brain. No brain, you're doing fine. A picture of Shepard's body intact on the planet would have been great. I wouldn't buy it without further exposition, but I'd be forced to accept it, because that's what the narrative would be showing us. Again, doesn't matter what genre the story is being told in, science fiction and fantasy allows for the capacity of themes of resurrection to exist. The expressions of that still need to be told or shown properly. And that's just the resurrection part. It says nothing of Shepard's death or preservation. Mass Effect 2 insults my knowledge of physics, biology, cryogenics, and of course, storytelling. Children can understand this.
Shepard, who exploded into millions of pieces at the start because he's faggot, he tried to rescue a cripple, and he failed and died for 2 years, and somehow was brought back to life with some stupid little thing. That sucks. Would have been better if Shepard died. How could they reconstruct his body into full, like what it was like before? BioWare, you should have came up with something better. I mean, you could have put Shepard in a coma for like fucking 15 years. And all that shit happens in 2 fucking years.
Every author of fantasy or science fiction must take great lengths to explain the universe they're creating, because it's fantastical. It's why we read these things. We probably wouldn't have thought of it otherwise. Pick up any fantasy story. In order for these stories to even get published, the first part or the first chapter or series of chapters must be comprised of setting up the universe by describing the setting, the color of trees, the mountains, the country or world we're in, maybe even the planet, or the reader is completely lost. Are we on Earth, some other world, some other universe, some dimension, what? Usually, this involves the unobtainium product or some magical alien thing that makes this universe special. These original mysterious ideas, which may involve death and rebirth, still have to be told properly.
First of all, raising an army 4 billion credits is not really a lot of money. I mean, America's own estimates had us spending over 9 billion.
I'm sorry, but I have no understanding of the relationship between American currency and Mass Effect credits, and I don't think you do either. But we don't have to because Shepard does.
You could have trained an entire army for what you spent to bring me back.
I don't care if they only hire 2 Zaids. That's a better investment than trying to create a medical miracle that has never been proven, especially considering the utter destruction of Shepard into molecules and having the writer forget about answers to basic science.
I mean, don't you think the council might look at that and go, huh, Cerberus doesn't like us, and they're raising an army. Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. We will just let them do it.
Uh-huh.
They don't know who's making these attacks. They don't know who's attacking who. So they're going to raise an army and then what?
Exactly. The Collector threat has nothing to do with resurrecting Shepard. In fact, if they found out about the Collector sooner, they should have stopped funding this insane idea and put more money and resources into intel and protecting humans. Shepard's simply not worth it. And as I said before, Tim would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives.
He raised that army, and then for 2 years he did what?
Again, you're not making a point for why Shepard should be resurrected. You're inventing a problem to a scenario that isn't there. Even if they just hire one competent guy, that's more efficient than taking 2 years and all that money to bring back Shepard. Or they could just not hire anyone and stop Project Lazarus. What you should have done is addressed what the reasons were for why they wanted Shepard and argued that. You inventing scenarios and then arguing that they're useless in lieu of not addressing the plot or any of my points, well, you're just ranting.
And form an army of barbarians.
Okay, so Hannibal formed an army. You're arguing we shouldn't form an army. Wait, what? If you're arguing that one guy has value, then sure, you can take any Shepard-like character, like another N7 agent, let's say Kai Lang, and they do just as well. They might not be able to recruit Tally, but she's not integral to the plot, so it's really no big deal.
Point is that one peasant girl completely changed the face of that war.
I don't know why or how Joan changed the face of war, but I'm guessing if she was a leader, it was because she had good military strategy. If she was a symbol, that's good too. Unfortunately, symbolism doesn't stop men on horseback with spears killing you. Also, unfortunately for your point, Shepard's skills or symbolism has nothing to do with Mass Effect 2's plot. Unless you were really hurting for credits and just had to have that Ilium Scaldfish, comparing human wars against flying spaceship elder cybernetic gods that destroy galaxies is a bit different. Having a really pretty figurehead probably won't help. And still, this argument has nothing to do with the plot of Mass Effect 2.
I argue that yes, one person very much can make that big of a difference.
I totally agree. One certain special person can make a difference in the world. Unfortunately, that person isn't Shepard, as proven in the plot. Your opinions of him are baseless. There is no fundamental special thing that Shepard does in Mass Effect 2 that can't be done by anyone else of any reasonable military capacity. It also helps that this supposed other protagonist is not a corpse.
And as someone who is getting a graduate degree in military history, let me tell you that
Hey, don't backpedal. I thought we agreed here. We don't dig arguments of authority, man. Those are just too uncool. Unfortunately, there is no example of Shepard uniquely changing the fate of the Collectors through their ability to raise morale that anyone else could have done. Compared to Mass Effect 1, Shepard's speeches are kind of lame. In fact, I think you could skip them. Oh wait, I know, I get it. Cerberus spent 4 billion credits, 2 years, got a new ship, and an entire space station to bring back Shepard just so he can go to the Citadel in his Cerberus logoed ship to buy 500 credit high-grade provisions to raise morale. That must be really damn good food.
Fine, let's take this another route. Cerberus thinks that they may have developed a technique of bringing people back to life from death.
Did they now? When was this? I'd love to know. I'd like to see or hear about it. I'd really like any exposition that actually makes sense about that.
Anyway, so why not Shepard?
So why would they hunt down Shepard's supposedly non-destroyed, somewhat preserved meat in tubes when any old dead human body would have done the job for testing? And this is still all under the assumption they had resurrection technology before they started the project, called Project Lazarus. Maybe the previous project that created the resurrection technology was called Project Jesus, or maybe Project Invented Bullshit. In Mass Effect 1, Hackett, Udina, and Anderson choose Shepard. Why? because he's competent and they want him to save the galaxy. What happens in Mass Effect 1? Shepard saves the galaxy. That might be contrived, idealistic, and too simple, but Shepard and only Shepard proves that in the plot. Tim and Miranda have a bunch of reasons, and none get realized in the plot.
It's much more likely that they were already working on the Lazarus Project, or at least the techniques of the Lazarus Project, long before Shepard ever died. And once Shepard died, they said, oh, well, hey, this would be a great test subject for the Lazarus Project.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what the narrative told us.
Let's go ahead and load him up. I doubt very seriously that Shepard died, and then Cerberus goes, oh, well, let's try and find a way to bring him back to life. That's not very likely. It's much more likely, like I said, that they were already working on.
Here, let me help you out here. Hi, I'm a BioWare fanboy. I must defend my bias by inventing stuff up that isn't even there.
Hero of the Citadel. He has the council behind him, or at least did at the time. He has people who love and adore him.
Hi, Shepard. We want to bring you back to life because others love and adore you.
If Cerberus can tell their backers that we now have the hero of the Citadel in our pocket, imagine how much more funding they would get from their backers.
Okay, if that was the case, don't you think their priorities might be a little off? Whoa, Tim, you totally brought back Shepard. That's cool. How about me? I'd like some of that immortality, please. You see, the potential method of resurrection that we think Shepard got could be a form of clinical immortality. If your body and apparently your brain gets blown away, then just make another. I doubt they'd really care what human was brought back if these inventors were looking for return on capital. That return being clinical immortality, not Mark Vanderloo's ass.
Standpoint, bringing Shepard back to life has so many advantages to Cerberus beyond what he can do for them against the Reapers.
Just listen to yourself here. Shepard can be our poster boy if and when he stops the Reapers. Right.
Cerberus is a secretive organization. They're not in the habit of telling the whole galaxy what they're doing.
Cerberus were a very wealthy one. Donated generously to Cerberus.
Our system has your ship flagged as Cerberus.
Cerberus. They killed our people, infiltrated our flotilla, and tried to blow up one of our ships.
Cerberus. The Cerberus frigate.
You are working for Cerberus.
Jacob Taylor. Normandy SR2. Miranda Lawson and Jacob Taylor. Lazarus Research Station. Ship now defunct. David Anderson. Citadel.
Nolenko was on Horizon. He said he was looking into Cerberus.
I know. I approved the mission.
We've got reports about you and Cerberus.
Reports? You mean you already knew?
Alliance intel said Cerberus could be behind our missing colonies. But there were rumors that you weren't dead.
You're with Cerberus. Kidnapping kids for biotic death camps? Killing Alliance admirals who ask questions? Hell, your own unit on a cruise!
Mr. Toombs, you're insane! You need help! It's Corporal! Corporal Toombs! You don't get to lie! Not today! Today it all comes out!
Cerberus is not going to develop a way of bringing people back to life and then share that knowledge with everyone. No, they're going to...
Exactly. If Wilson was the head researcher and can cheat death, not only would Cerberus see him as extremely valuable, Cerberus can use this with those supposed investors you think love Vanderloo's cybernetic colon so much, or anyone else they want, with a simple sales pitch. Want to cheat death? Want clinical immortality? Come on down.
Which means that Wilson... he's going to be a rock star?
Why not? He cheated death, or someone else figured it out, or somehow it was done. All I can really point to is Wilson. If you could cheat death, would you not want to use this knowledge to your advantage? Tim would put him in touch with investors and get paid crazy money to solve people's death problem. It would make virtually all medical science obsolete. Or Tim would buy all his research, or patents, or whatever from Wilson and give Wilson a nice nest egg. Or Wilson would secretly escape and not cause a giant ruckus because he wants fame and fortune. Because he's not a moron. However, what I'm really concerned with is Wilson's motives for trying to get everyone killed and the lack of exposition to explain this behavior. In Lair the Shadow Broker, a DLC has one sentence with Wilson's name in it from a dossier on Legion. I don't know what's worse, that it wasn't in the main plot or it's a name dropped in Legion's dossier. Without the DLC, which is an argument after the fact, by the way, we can't even make this deduction. This still raises more questions. We still don't know Wilson's motives for why he was a shadow broker mole, why he would be pissed off not getting enough money from Tim if he was already getting paid off by the shadow broker, and why he'd cause a ruckus to have suspicion pointed at him if he wanted to keep his guys intact, with his life on the line. Wasn't the shadow broker trying to get Shepard's body, not destroy it? Instead, Miranda just blows Wilson away. She may be right, but I don't know how.
As far as that argument goes about Wilson being a medical person, so he wants to help people instead of hurt them?
Doctors have this thing called the Hippocratic Oath, but this is Cerberus, and Wilson's just a medical officer, so that makes sense. I'm sure deep down it all comes down to money anyway, or maybe caregiving, or those really fancy lab coats and medical gadgets because chicks dig biomedical science. I don't know. Either way, we don't know Wilson's motives for sabotaging an entire station, trying to get everyone killed, including the person he wants to resurrect, and why money and Miranda were a good enough motivation to blow his cover as a shadow broker mole. Wilson's behavior and effects do not fit his motive, or the means and method upon which he tried to accomplish his goal and ends up being an idiot. And this is supposedly the only guy or wizard that can hopefully explain Shepard's resurrection.
Did handle the problem of, well, you have to re-level up Shepard, and how do we get the time lapse to where the team's broken up, and so...
Gameplay does not necessarily need to be explained unless it's lore creation or lore breaking. 2 years is completely pointless. All of this could have been possible with exactly the same conditions, like if Shepard was put into a coma. At no point is their death relevant, important, symbolic, or has any meaning toward anything, except being told on how not to write a resurrection story. All the drama of having the Normandy destroyed would still be there.
If you didn't follow all the hype leading into the game, you were surprised.
Yeah, because it's almost completely asinine. Not saying it can't be done or done well, but there was no reason for it. The whole premise involves the writer shooting themselves in the foot, and then letting the narrative try and act like it didn't even happen, all because of some E3 Casey Hudson comment.
Well, you find the person who created it, and you beat the crap out of them, which is...
Whoa, you have an actual point regarding the motives of our antagonists. I don't know where that came from, but I'm suddenly not crying on the inside as hard. Unfortunately, we're talking about resurrection, not our opposing force's desire to stop the protagonist. Still, no argument for needing to bring Shepard back.
No argument? No nothing? What? Not in my game.
And what value is this conflict? Imagine a boulder named Plot in the shape of Tim's glowing sun, about to crush Shepard amidst an attitude of reluctant acceptance. Where are these arguments? One either struggles or runs from the conflict because it's important, or disregards it because it's no big deal. Shepard doesn't care. Tim doesn't care. They both care about saving people, but that's not the plot. They're not doing a save the human plot. They're doing a kill the bad guys plot. Tim wants his little pawn to go off and do his bidding. Their dialogue influences nothing and doesn't impact the plot. Tim is the plot provider, and at no point does Shepard have any choices of any value to make with him except the destruction of the base, which is after the plot is resolved. If there's no challenge, no struggle, it's just an intersection. Nothing happens. If this were two bulls ready to charge at each other and there's all this anticipation and ideology and anger and strutting and rage as they formulate arguments, that would be something. Tim's too damn chilled out from drinking so much, and Shepard just shrugs his shoulders and does whatever Tim wants to do anyway. They can talk all they want, but there's no resolution to any of it. So their conflict, if it's there, is meaningless. There should have been many of these small kinds of meaningful conflicts that support the main themes of the story as they build up to the base choice. This is why Shepard is a brick. and has no internal conflict, and Tim is just some guy and doesn't provide any external conflict. He's neither good, bad, or gray. He's just Tim, and he's just there to hand out plot tickets. If there was any opportunity to Shepard and Tim to have any meaningful argument like Akuz or Admiral Kahoku or Corporal Toombs, it's not there. When we start analyzing characters and can only describe them as plot devices by what they say and do, which has no meaningful value, well, we're having a series of fundamental problems with the narrative.
Wow, that would have been awesome! I completely agree, that would have been great. It's not very realistic for a video game.
An unrealistic plot is based on the content of the why of events and characters, and why the protagonist or whomever is actually on the path they're on, and how other avenues aren't addressed. Like Mass Effect 2's plot, whose goal is never realized. To say it's unrealistic to break off from Tim isn't false, because the issue wasn't even addressed. It wasn't even hand-waved or lampshaded or challenged or even alluded to. That's what makes the plot unrealistic. It also turns Shepard into a passive protagonist, as well as a bumbling protagonist. The Collector Cruiser mission has so much proof of just how inept Shepard, his crew, Tim, and the Collectors are in one of the worst main plot scenes of the game. Actually, no, they're all garbage.
You can't ask everything of them and expect to get it.
I'm not asking for multiple plot lines. I'm asking for one done right. You can have good writing explain being with Cerberus. Now, I wouldn't be against having actual choices that matter, since that's what BioWare has supposedly been selling us on, and choices may imply multiple plots or subplots to a main plot. Of course, that won't ever happen, because BioWare didn't make Alpha Protocol.
I gotta kind of ask the same question. Did you play the first game?
Shepard ends up looking for the Reapers at the end of Mass Effect 1. Instead, in Mass Effect 2, we get their mindless, this time organic servants. We already had this in Mass Effect 1's Geth. Why are we back to square one with an even more poorly developed opposing force whose only impact make the Reapers look like idiots? The issue stems from the overarching plot and Shepard's goal. He's trying to stop the Reapers. We need to learn about our enemy. We need a means of defending ourselves. Learning about the Collectors shows us nothing we didn't already know. The plot did not develop. Worse, it did nothing with the end of Mass Effect 1. If we did get some exposition about the Reapers, that would have been something. Instead, we learned nothing. We changed nothing. Fighting a proxy war is irrelevant if it doesn't progress the overarching plot. It doesn't matter if it's Geth, Collectors, or some other force. The conflict needs to mean something. Saving humans is all good and true, but if it doesn't tie back into the overarching plot, it's just one giant subplot and one giant piece of fan fiction, which at the end of the day is all Mass Effect 2 was. A giant frame story with other independent stories that aren't related.
No matter what he faces or how the story goes, he just remains the same. And if that's the case in your games, I say that's completely your fault.
Where did I have the option in the game to develop Shepard?
This is a role-playing game. The idea of a role-playing game is to give the player the option of how their character grows and changes, or if they do at all.
Where? I am never given that option. The only thing I can do is have Shepard select social dialogue options, which I don't even know what they're going to do before I select them. In typical adventure quest stories, the protagonist is some kind of ideal human specimen, sort of a paragon of humanity, and they can take on any challenge and survive it. But they very rarely change this persona as the story goes on. This is a very common problem with good versus evil plots.
We need to work together.
What options are these? Where are they? Shepard is a static, flat character. He was made that way. I wish he really wasn't, but that's the fact. All you're doing is projecting what you think is going on. You have no evidence. In psychology, this is referred to as a pathological defense mechanism. Come on, don't give me your personal role-playing experience and state it as objective fact.
done before you played her loyalty mission. Guess what? Your Shepard just grew and changed.
And where was this conflict that changed Shepard? What was the change in Shepard? Where was the Jack Shepard arc? You could argue that Jack grew as a character through their romance as a result of Shepard, but not the other way around. The validity of someone growing as a person by having the start of a romantic relationship is a bit silly, but hey, that's fiction for you. The only response from Shepard if one romanced Jack is when Liara asks him about her.
She's getting better, relatively speaking. I suppose not. But she's important to me.
Okay, Shepard admits they have a romantic interest. Shepard now cares for someone. There's a bit of reluctance in their voice. This is not character development. And still, this is only found in the DLC from an optional romance. The plot doesn't impact Shepard. Shepard could like donuts, or a certain assault rifle, or whatever. Selecting Paragon and Renegade options shows emotions. But that's as far as the characterization goes. There are no scenes or elements that change Shepard's personality. This opportunity isn't essential to a story, but it definitely helps, at least in my opinion. Shepard's an unchanging brick because 1, he's this strong, powerful protagonist, the immovable center, which is not too uncommon in hero stories, and 2, to provide the voice to the illusion of choice through the PR system, which simplifies this surface deep characterization.
The point I'm making is, you change Shepard.
Yeah, but only if there was a change presented in the narrative. But there wasn't one. Your subjective interpretation of what a role-playing game is doesn't help. I'm objectively looking at Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 1, not trying to categorize them into what I think they are or what I think they should be. There are no avenues for what you're talking about. No game options. There's just no evidence. I can only conclude you're projecting these ideas. And having your own opinion about personal role-playing experience and what you went through, that's cool. But making a response that has nothing to do with my points, or by inventing a narrative or inventing characterization and not even bothering to refute my points is a little disappointing. I was expecting something to work with here. Instead it's just, well, your opinion. So aside from you pointing out your misinterpretation of what I said, of events, of scenes and characterization, not even bothering to challenge any of my points with any evidence, and the only point you really made was that, the Reapers attacked Shepard through the Collectors because they're the bad guys. I'll give you that.